A D&D story of Zanizyre, the Mad Wizard. At the height of his power, Zanizyre, the gnome, was among the most highly respected wizards on the entire continent of Melanour. Renowned for both his knowledge of magic and history, Zanizyre was also much admired for the generosity of his spirit and his sense of humor. He was always willing to entertain visitors to his vast home built on the bluffs over the great city of Elsinox, and he loved to hear their tales of the far-off adventures and explorations they'd done on the continent. For many years, Zanizyre was the master of the Wizards Guild, and he was also a renowned tinkerer, as many gnomes were, delighting in building clockwork devices, often looking like animals, which would then mimic the movements and sounds of their living counterparts, but often giving out a gift at the end of one of their routines. And then came the zenith of Zanizyre's reputation, when just after the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the city of Elsinox, Zanizyre was offered the post of vizier of the city. But to every citizen's surprise, Zanizyre refused this great honor. And shortly thereafter, he sold his fabulous home and most of his library, and he moved to a small island in the Bay of Zanizyre. He built a dwelling on this rocky outpost, bringing only a few of his trusted servants. It was said by some of his friends that Zanizyre had become obsessed of late with his clockwork hobby, that he had made some kind of breakthrough which he promised would revolutionize this aspect of tinkering. It was said that the wizard was weighted on hand and foot by his clockwork constructs, that they had worked tirelessly day and night to build a huge laboratory under his home on his rocky island. And it was also rumored that this once brilliant wizard, so beloved by the powerful and meek alike, was hopelessly insane. It was said that those who dared to trespass on Zanizyre's island met some horrible fate at the hands of his clockwork constructs. A few fishermen who found themselves cast on the shores of his island in a storm talked of a mysterious mist and the cries of the victims of Zanizyre. Many passed this off as, superstition by simple folk, but others weren't so sure. And of course, soon enough, the truth of what happened to Zanizyre will come out, because the player characters are going to visit his island. Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping one and all homebrew their own D&D campaign. So in the last episode, I showed how I took a maze that I found on the internet and adapted it for online use. For me, it was with Fantasy Grounds. The idea being you could now go through a maze much more easily when you do it with digital tools. So now I thought I'd take that maze and I would adapt it to an encounter. I would make something out of this that could stand as something that runs along the lines of storylines in your own campaign, could be a standalone in your campaign, kind of a one-shot within your campaign, and it also could be the one-shot you just run in with pre-made characters. And as you can see from my rather elaborate introduction, I came up with this idea of Zanizyre, the gnome wizard, one time mighty and well-respected, and he's retreating to this island, and he creates the maze to punish those who would trespass on his island. And this is what I call the who and why of any encounter. Who created the maze, and why did they create it? And in the story of Zanizyre and his retreat from society, I have an interesting locale for the maze, the mist-shrouded island. Now that I've got this, now I do the how and why of the encounter, which relates to the players. How do they find out about Zanizyre's island, and why do they go there? And this is going to be slightly altered depending on this sort of encounter, whether it's a storyline encounter, standalone, or whether it's just a one-shot you run with pre-made characters. It's interesting, in terms of the who and why of this encounter, I found this on the internet, and I noticed that I had a maze that had no exits, right? And so I thought of it as a prison maze in which the target or group or whatever is teleported to one location on the maze. They have to find their way to another location where there's either a doorway or another teleport. And I had imagined, some evil wizard or cultists who watch this process, watch the group trying to fight their way through and delight in, their failure. And I thought, well, if it's been long abandoned, Is it just a maze, with random monsters, perhaps from some entranceways, the Underdark or something? Then I thought, well, if it were still operating as a maze, but the maker was long gone, perhaps it could be constructs. Because obviously they don't eat, they don't need air, and they often serve their master unthinkingly and ceaselessly. And so then when I was thinking of constructs, one of the more interesting is the clockwork constructs. We saw them in Mordecai's tome. Obviously, the new book, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, talks about the Artificer as a class. I'm not going to so much use the Artificer here as Zanizyre the gnome. Two reasons. One, I've looked at Tasha's Cauldron. I don't know it in depth. I haven't introduced it into my own campaign, so I'm not quite sure I want to do that. But also, I was thinking of combining this in terms of a storyline for my campaign into this Elder civilization, Elder magic. So that's the direction I'm going to go with the clockwork. And it's not necessarily going to be the same if eventually I do introduce artificers. But having said that, if you've got the artificer class in your campaign, you could certainly have some artifact or some item which greatly increases, obviously already they can attune to more items than the usual character class, and this might increase their abilities to create things. Again, as an artifact, as a powerful item, as we'll see, it's going to have some negative effects. Because the point is, it's always story that's more compelling for the players than merely the rules and the classes and all that sort of thing. So the story that unfolds as the players come to Zanizyre's island, as they discover the maze, as they learn things about his fate, this is going to be what's interesting in terms of the relationship between the desires and motivations of Zanizyre, his greatness as a wizard and as an individual, and the corruption that power brings. Because when you have a figure like Zanizyre, like many other famous, real-life figures and those in books, who seem to have everything, they have fame, they have wealth, and they're not satisfied. So then Zanizyre discovers this item, he makes advances in clockwork technology using this, he becomes obsessed by this, but it corrupts him. Zanizyre was among the best of the best, not just in his abilities, but in his personality, and that's what attracts a item like this. Think, of course, of the ring in Lord of the Rings, but there are other, novels where this happens. I can think of Albert Camus' The Fall, which puts a much more lyrical bent on this dilemma than I can do. The item convinces Zanizyre that his supposed friends and associates aren't worthy of his attention. They're just spongers and users. It convinces him that he must test them, and so this maze was built to see whether or not they were worthy of his attention. But in fact, it serves more for this device's desire to see sentient beings, crushed and humiliated, because it imagines that the clockwork creations that it specializes in, that it is, are superior to the, carbon-based life form. So you have two questions here, of course. What is this item that has made this advance with Zanizyre, and what has happened to him? Now, you can treat the item and its powers as kind of a MacGuffin to this story, and I'll put a link below as to what a MacGuffin is if you don't know. And also, you could have Zanizyre as the endpoint, especially for a standalone or for a one-shot adventure, in which the item has, imprisoned him in a pocket dimension, perhaps insane, perhaps not, and then runs its constructs just for its own, entertainment, and the players have to come, they have to solve the puzzles or whatever, come to the end and free Zanizyre. If you want to connect it to a storyline like I'm doing in mine with this ancient race and their technology, then you want to get into more like who created this and why. Is it serving its purpose, or was it somehow warped with the fall of this civilization? You can just get broader and broader and more detail. The thing is, when you create the adventure, even if you're going to connect it there, you don't have to have that right away. Let the players discover this over time, and then you can develop it as well. Because when you let the story items, I've got to know exactly who made this and their relation and what is this, it can overwhelm you. And these are the kind of things that make you think, I just can't do a homebrew like this. Don't worry about it. Just let's create this adventure. Let's keep this small. Let's keep it as simple as we can and worry about it later. And whether this is related to this, elaborate storyline of your world, or whether it's just a one-shot within your world, or just a standalone with pre-made characters, is going to affect the how and why of your players finding out about Zanizyre and his island and going there. Because, if you've made an adventure to just run with pre-made characters, the players are just going to be like, okay, this is where we have to go, let's go. Whereas in a sandbox campaign where the players decide where they go, they're going to, want to have some information about, well, what's the deal here? Is it, how dangerous is it? What is it worth my time? And they can always go somewhere else. So in the one shot, you can just say some local fishermen have disappeared on Zanizyre's island, and there are rumors of treasure, and the players go, okay, this is what we're going to do. So the thing about a long-term campaign is everybody in the city of Elsinox, probably on the entire continent, knows the story of Zanizyre, knows that he was this famous, powerful wizard who suddenly decided to move to this tiny island and eventually, didn't want any visitors and then has disappeared. And obviously, adventurers, let's say that's 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever it is, adventurers would have presumably gone there to at least try to loot the place or discover this. So you want to set something up where something has prevented them from doing this, or the powers that be have, placed the island off limits. Obviously, if there's this elder magic thing and the, few of the citizens, are really high level people, NPCs in your world know about this, that may be a reason for them to say, stay away from Zanizyre's island. But you can also make some things, as we'll see, that make the island, it's difficult to get to, it's shrouded in mist, people have gone and have met horrible fates. It's rumored that it was already looted, there's nothing left there, this sort of thing. And you can also give the players some secret knowledge. There's a certain time and phase of the moon or time of the year in which the storms around the island, subside. There's some person with a ability or an item that allows them to get through this impenetrable mist, this sort of thing. And of course, it depends on the time period of your campaign. If the characters are 9th level or 11th or 12th or something like that, by this time they'll have knowledge of this elder race. They'll realize that the various powerful NPCs of your world are trying to get this information, and Zanizyre's island may have something. Okay, so once you've established the why and how of the maze itself, who built it and why, and the how and why of the players, how they find out about it, now they have to get there. And again, in a one shot that you're just going to run 1 or 2 sessions, pre-made characters, they just get there. They just, you get on a boat or whatever it is, and there you are on the island, wherever you want to begin, where trouble begins, where the players have to start using their resources. When you have a campaign or a longer game, even for a standalone, you want to track time. You want to say, okay, they find out about this, they go there, and their activities affect other NPCs and other events. And if you want to see more on this, look at my video on tracking time. It talks about how when you introduce a storyline, time starts for that story. So in this case, they're going to travel along this road to this fishing village. Perhaps it's here that the local fishermen have some route to the island that others don't know about. It might be here where some item that allows you to get through the mist or whatever is located. Again, then they have to go onto shore. Perhaps the fishermen drop them off. So one of the questions you always have to ask yourself when your players travel across water is whether they have a random encounter. There's an old D&D joke that ships sail the seas without incident until there's a player character aboard, and then the seas are awash with pirates and dragon turtles. So you could just let the dice decide this, or let the time constraints of the type of run you're doing decide it. So another question when the player characters get to the island is, do you want to have an informational map of it, anywhere from 1 to half or even quarter square mile per hex. So what this does is it forces the players to travel across the island to Zanizyre's home, using game mechanics, the possibility of running into something. You can have an encounter or two to lend some flavor, maybe give the players an idea of these constructs, or have some other creature they run into that gives them information about what's going on at Zanizyre's home. Because this can seem like a slog, the players just want to get to Zanizyre's, find out what's going on. They don't necessarily want to fight a pterodactyl. Although, a construct pterodactyl could be quite easy. I'm going to create a battle map of Zanizyre's house using a 5-foot square grid, using fantasy grounds. And I'm, once again, like I did with my maze, I'm going to use the technology of the internet to find some inspiration for my house. I'm thinking I don't want it to just be like any typical gnome thing. We got involved with these constructs, something different. And I searched for unique houses on the internet, and I found this, which is Casa Malaparte. This was a home built for the Italian writer Curzio Malaparte. In the 30s, it was done in this futurist Italian style. It's a very striking home. Steps that go up the top, this strange architectural statue, whatever this form is on the roof. And another great thing about using something you found on the internet, a house that has architectural fame, is that you will have plan drawings of the house. So I'm going to use those, bring those into Dungeon Draft to make it easier to make the actual house. So I have this idea of using Malapart's house on Capri to base Zanizyre's home. And I'm going to make a map. Now, this map is going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to speed things up, but I want to go over the process of building a map, thinking about how the players are going to approach this, what sort of obstacles you're going to have, what they're going to see, what the mood is. Because I'm going to have obstacles like the mist and the spirits that I talked about. I'm also thinking about adding a ghost in Zanizyre's last retainer. Again, not a deadly ghost, and it doesn't have like aging gaze or some kind of death scream or something. But he would scare off anybody that just wandered onto the island, and also he could provide some information to the players. He perhaps doesn't want to be a ghost anymore. So that's going to take a little bit more time than I think I have for this episode, so I'm going to do it next time, which I'm looking forward to. In the meantime, of course, if you like my channel, please subscribe. Always looking for more. Leave some comments. I love to hear them. But as always, my friends, most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.